In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. So today is the chains of St. Peter. We have the account in the Acts of the Apostles. He was chained up and put in prison, and then he was miraculously delivered by an angel that would have executed him. And we actually have his chains. The chains, I'm not sure where they are, if they're on Mount Athos, but we have the chains of St. Peter, and people can venerate them. And perhaps that would be what a person should talk about when he does prison ministries. This is a liturgy in our Marshall house, which is part of our prison ministry. But I would say that the better text to talk about is the first gospel that we read, because the greatest prison that anyone can have is the prison of their own passions. The free world's not so free. I tell people in prison that all the time. It's not so free at all. And I don't really see a whole lot of difference between the free world and the prison world. Not in its essence. Because in its essence, people are either free in their hearts or not. There are people that are free in their hearts and they're in prison. There are people who are enslaved to their passions and they're in the so-called free world. And a big key to being free is talked about in this first gospel. It's about being faithful in small things, and then you're faithful in much. Now, I have a term called prison or penitentiary honesty, and I've encountered this many times. Now, it doesn't happen just in the penitentiary. It happens really all over the so-called free world. But it is really prevalent in the penitentiary. Sort of an idea that I got to do what I got to do. And I'll be honest, I have friends, take care of them, we take care of each other. But when it comes to them or me, or when it comes to I'm being stressed, when it comes to something really kind of gets me in that place where I've been traumatized, boom, I'm just going to lie and sing like a canary. And that is penitentiary honesty. We have it in this world too. It's really a kind of being a sociopath. It's really what it is. It's sort of a gradation of being a sociopath, of saying, I justify my actions because of my need. I have to lie because of this. One of the people have asked me for a blessing to get a fake vaccine certificate. It's like, I have a blessing to be able to tell you, authority as a priest to tell you that you have a blessing to sin? I can't do that. If a person gets a fake vaccine certificate, that's on them. It's a sin. They might think it's a small sin. Okay, fine. According to the gospel, if you do small sins, you're going to do big sins. That's what this gospel tells us. So penitentiary honesty is this cancer that is in so many people. It's in us too. We're not always honest. And that's a terrible thing, to not always be honest. Now, the greatest dishonesty is the dishonesty to ourselves. When we tell ourselves we are something we are not. When we keep ourselves from really knowing our sins. When we have an inflated view of ourselves. When our inflated view of ourselves then makes us prideful, makes us angry when people do something that we consider an affront, makes us upset when we think we're not treated fairly, or that we don't get the promotion that we think we should have, or that person is not as good as us and now making more money than us, or whatever it is. It's because we're lying to ourselves. We have an image of ourselves that's not true. The true image of ourselves is that we're made in the image of God, and we're going to appear in His likeness if we live with humility and according to the grace of God, and not because of anything that we can do of our own effort, but because God will assist us in everything. And we're not worthy of it, but God has given it to us as our inheritance, so that we will become sons of God. That's a true vision of who we are. That's the real correct self-esteem. But the world has this incorrect self-esteem. Either people are sort of hate themselves because they don't measure up to what they think they should do, whatever it is. Usually it's that they don't have the big enough car or this or that. It's all material or based upon what they've been able to accomplish, or their perceived idea of how smart they are, how pretty they are, or how this or how that. Or people are just full of just judgment of others because they think they're better than others. And we must learn to have absolute, scrupulous honesty. Now, I'm not telling you that, if someone says, look at my baby, isn't he beautiful, and it's an ugly baby, that you say that's an ugly baby. Of course not. That's just cruelty. But you don't wax on about it being the most beautiful baby ever. You say that's a wonderful child. And he is beautiful because he's made in the image of God. But we are honest, scrupulously honest in the way we live with one another. This is the big problem in prison, and it's a big problem in the so-called free world. So let's look at the gospel and just see if any of these words convict us. Are we living this way or not? So he says, the one who is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. The one who is unjust in that which is least is unjust also in much. When a person's in prison, or when a person's working a difficult job, or when a person's doing anything in their life, why are you doing it? Why are you here? Well, because in the will of God, in the providence of God, that's where you're at. And what are you supposed to be doing when you're there? You're supposed to be faithful in everything. Prison is a really hard place. There's no doubt about it. It's a dark place. There's a lot of loneliness in prison. There's a lot of lamenting, saying, I'm not seeing my boy grow up. He's growing up without a father. I haven't seen my wife in forever, or she divorced me when I came to prison. My dad died while I was in prison. All that kind of stuff. It's a very dark place. And if you're a sane person, then prison is just a Alice in Wonderland kind of insanity. It's loud. People just live in a bizarre way. Not everybody. Not even the highest percentage. But there's enough people that are just acting like crazy people. Swearing and cursing and scatological humor and strange sexuality and all kinds of stuff that's happening. So it's really hard to have your bearings because it's just a difficult place. But if we're in that place, what should we do? We should live according to the gospel. We should fulfill that which is least so that we will continue to fulfill those things and then also fulfill that which is the most. So it's important to be scrupulously honest in prison. I find that prison to me is an amplification of the free world. It's what it really is. It's not different. It's just sort of an amplification. It's sort of the free world on steroids, shall we say. So in the free world, people tend to use up other people. A person's a friend until they're no longer useful. Or until a person's angry with them, or if they fulfilled their purpose, then they're, as we say in modern parlance, they're ghosted. Prison ghosting happens all the time. People just get discarded and thrown to the side of the road. And that is a terrible, terrible sin. We should never throw anybody to the side of the road. Every relationship that we have is an important one, even if we don't have an ongoing relationship. And therefore, we should remember that person, pray for them, think the best thoughts about them, and not discard them. Discarding them is a kind of, I would say, lie. Because it's like, when you're with them, I like you, you're a good guy, I'll take care of you, and then later on, I'm done with you. So the original friendship was a lie. And we must not live a lie. We have to live scrupulously, honestly. And that is the way I think a person can survive prison or survive difficult life, is to be honest. I was reading about Saint Iacobus, a Greek saint. I was given the book as a gift, and he died in 1990 maybe, something like that. And he was very, very, very poor as a child, and just absolutely scrupulously honest, because his mother, who was a saint, he later had a vision that she was with the just. She died in her 40s. She looked like she was 80 because of the hard life she had. She wouldn't let them take fruit that had fallen off of a tree in a neighbor's orchard. It doesn't belong to you. Don't eat it. So one day they were walking and they were hungry. Their stomachs were empty, and they saw the animals that were eating half-rotten fruit that had fallen from the tree. You know, the goats and the sheep. And they didn't take any of the fruit. And he grew up to be an incredible saint. The book is very edifying to me. His mother was scrupulously honest. Some people would say, that's crazy. Your children were hungry. They were starving. Well, I guess children could have full bellies, but if they're not full of Christ, then they are starving. This mother taught her children to be holy, to be saints. And by being scrupulously honest, even not to eat rotten fruit in an orchard because it didn't belong to them. Pretty amazing. I think most of us would have eaten the fruit. But they didn't. So we should live in that way. If you live in that way, then you're living above the vast majority of humanity. And it makes a difference. It actually matters. Even though from day to day maybe they don't look like there's any difference, things are still terrible. And in prison, things are just always terrible. Right now the food is horrendous. Horrendous in prison. It's way worse than 2 years ago. It's just horrible. It's not nutritious. They have very little protein sources. It's just terrible. It's just terrible. I have even before then, when I would go to prison, sometimes the chaplain would say, hey, you want to go have breakfast? And I'd think, no, it smells unbelievably horrible. Just the rancid smell, it's horrible. I suppose if you lived in prison, you'd get used to it. But if you just go there once a week or twice a week like I did, I never got used to it. Now, I did like their cornbread, but that was about the only thing. But it's a hard environment, and every day it's still hard. And every day there are still crazy people, and there's all these weird people doing all their strange gender stuff, and there's all this cursing and all this lying, and everybody's always trying to get an advantage, guards and prisoners alike, and it's just icky and ucky. But if you are in prison, and you live according to a code, that you live with honesty, then this is living in an angelic way in the midst of all this unangelic stuff. I'm absolutely convinced this is the way that a person comes out of prison or comes out of any situation that's stressful, whole and intact. Unfortunately, I would say that most people that come out of prison, whether they were in prison because they were guilty or not, they don't come out intact. I've known a few that have. But for the most part, they don't really come out intact. There's just something wrong with them. Because their concept of honesty is warped. Most people's concept of honesty is warped. It's a very self-serving concept. But the gospel doesn't give us any excuses here. We have to be faithful in that which is little, or else we won't be faithful in much. I once heard an evaluation of how good a person is. A person is, let's say, powerful, and you see how he treats those who are under him. How does he talk to the janitor? How does he talk to the maid? How does he talk to the person that takes out the garbage or the plumber, even though he's a CEO and a director or whatever? How does he relate to those people? Do they just order them around? Does he speak to them disdainfully, or does he speak to them kindly, just as he would to a fellow businessman? That's the kind of person who's talking well to anybody, no matter what their station in life. That's a person who's faithful in small things and is then capable of being faithful in great things. So he says, if then you have not been faithful in unrighteous mammon, who will entrust you to the true wealth? Well, what wealth are we trying to have? That begs the question, what is it to be wealthy? Most people think to be wealthy is to have comforts, to have a good life, etc., etc., to be well thought of, to have education, etc. That's their concept of wealth. But what is true wealth? True wealth is God abides in the heart, and that we're aware of God, and that we're illuminated by God. That's the only wealth. Everything else is just dirt. So most people think dirt is a diamond, but it's not. What is a diamond is to have God in the heart and to be illuminated by Him. So really, you must know what wealth is. And you must pursue that true wealth. The true wealth is God in the heart, is the fulfillment of our purpose, which is to become like Him in every single way. And if in that which is another's ye have not been faithful, who will give you that which is your own? Well, what is your own? Your own is your inheritance. We're made according to the image of God to fulfill His righteousness. To fulfill His likeness, which is righteous, of course. So that's what our own is. Nobody can take that from you. It doesn't matter if you're poor or rich, in prison or not. It doesn't matter. No one can take that from you if you don't let them. It belongs to you. That is your own. But if you're not faithful in the things that are not your own, in the things that God lets you borrow, whether it be money or wealth or health or freedom or anything else, then that which is your own will be taken away from you. Or actually you'll just lose it. You'll lose grip on it, and it'll just float away, and you won't even know that it's gone, because you'll be distracted by all the shiny new things that are important to you. So you can live an evangelic life, a perfect life, a beautiful life, in any situation, whether you're poor or rich, hungry or not, in prison or out of prison, being persecuted or not, doesn't matter. If you have that which is your own, which is your inheritance, which is to have the image of God within you and to have that become burnished into His likeness, nobody can take that away except yourself, except your own incompetence, your own ungratefulness. So I think that this is the perfect gospel for people in prison, because so many people in prison says, it's all been taken away from me. The state took this away from me. I didn't deserve this. Even if I was guilty, I didn't deserve 50 years or 40 years. I had this sentence because I'm poor. I had this sentence because I'm Hispanic, or something else. My mother and my father and my girlfriend, they abandoned me when I came to prison. And they took everything from me. And I hate them for that. Well, those are all temporary things. But what's not temporary is who you are. And they forget who they are. But you don't have to be in prison to go to do this. You just have to be with anybody who works in an office or in a store or anywhere. Just regular people, for the most part, have this very self-centered view of their own life. And therefore they don't see what is their own. What is their own is God made them in His image. That you possess. Nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. And if you realize that, and if you live according to that integrity, then you live like an angel. We're supposed to live like angels. So he goes on to say, not one household slave is able to serve two lords. Either he will hate the one and love another, or love the other, or he will hold to the one and despise the other. That's a typical parallelism, the doublets that are so much part of Jewish and therefore Byzantine poetry. He basically said the same thing twice. A household slave can't serve two lords. You are not able to serve God and mammon. And the elites who loved money thought, oh, he's talking about money. He wants to take away our money. He's judging us for money. We hate him. We got to get rid of him for that. Well, he wasn't talking about money. Mammon is anything which you value that is not valuable. Mammon could be money. It could be prestige. It could be a degree. It could be many, many other things. It could be even freedom and getting out of prison. That could be mammon. Because your life shouldn't begin when you get out of prison. It's continuing no matter where you are. I've known people that are frozen in time, and they got to have all these different court proceedings and this and that and the other thing because they've been cheated, and they're busy trying to get out of prison when actually they should get out of prison by being free in their heart. Now, nobody in their right mind would want to stay in prison. I'm not pretending that it wouldn't be really, really hard for me to be in prison. But if I was in prison, may God grant me to be the same man that I am, and better than I am now, and live according to truth, and not according to some inflated, strange view of things, and according to whatever my mammon might be. So the Jews wanted to kill him because of that. But he said to them at the end, "Ye are they who justify themselves before the face of men, but God knoweth your hearts. For that which is exalted among men is an abomination before the face of God." I kind of use as a rule of thumb, if everybody believes something, it's not true. If the world believes something, the world says something, it's not true. Especially when they enforce it with an iron fist, we see this during pandemic times. You must believe the science. Well, I guarantee you, the science that they're talking about believing ain't true because of the way they're enforcing it. Just not based upon a scientific evaluation of their statements, but because based upon their actions. When people push for, a vast majority of people push for something where the mob is going, go the opposite direction, for the most part. That would be true. Unless you were fortunate enough to be in a monastery where everyone is living faithfully. I think there was one when, if you remember the life of Saint Mary of Egypt, Zosimus was in a monastery where everyone was living just angelically. In that case, follow the crowd. But other than that, a good rule of thumb is if it's conventional wisdom, it's not wisdom. The wisdom of God is not the wisdom of man. And the things that men value, the vast majority of them, are an abomination to God. What a terrible thing to live as an abomination and not even know it. What a terrible thing. To be an abominable to God because we're honest with our friends, but we lie to those that we don't consider friends or that we consider people to be used. To be abominable to God because we value things that are sinful, and we give into our passions and we pretend that it is because, well, this is the way things are, this is what I have to do. Those are abominations to God. They're not just sins, they're not just human weaknesses, they're not just like, I'm just human, I'm only human. They are abominations to God. Now, don't label as what other people do as abominations. Just label what you do as an abomination. If you're not honest with other people, if you have some passion that you indulge in, that's an abomination. That's your personal abomination. What other people do? Well, perhaps there's some mitigating circumstance for them. But you shouldn't think there's any mitigating circumstances for you. It's not like you have to do what you got to do and to get by. That's sort of like a mantra that just is present in prison so much. Got to do what I got to do. Well, you got to do what's according to your heart. And if you do that, then you're living honestly, and you're living according to God who is within you, and you're living according to that which is your own. The only thing that you own is that God made you in his image to become according to his likeness. God bless you and help you in all things. Amen.